Okay, so welcome everyone to the sports nutrition discussion, where we'll be talking to Hannah Thornton and Lauren Delaney about nutrition and basketball. Our first guest today is Hannah Thornton. Hannah is a sports performance nutrition, currently working at her own company, Next Generation Health. She has a bachelor's degree in sports and exercise science and nutrition from the University of Northern Colorado, where she received a D1 scholarship. Hannah is in her final month of her Masters in Applied Sports and Exercise Nutrition and is the captain of DCU Mercy Super League team and a member of the Irish women's team. So thanks for being here, Hannah.
Thank you very much for having me.
Our second guest is Lauren Delaney. So Lauren is an elite performance and nutrition and PhD candidate based in the UK. Lauren has worked for the past 7 years with the English Institute of Sport with a range of Olympic and Paralympic sports, in particular British cycling. Lauren has recently started her PhD at Leeds Beckett University, looking at nutrition in rugby and behaviour change science. Lauren played basketball for Ireland on under 16 level up until she was 25, where she transferred to playing rugby union and is a current member of the Irish women's senior 15 team, having 12 caps for Ireland so far in her career. So thanks for being here, Lauren.
Yeah, cheers for having me. Good to be here.
Okay, so we'll get into the questions. So the first question I have for you, and Hannah, maybe you'll start with this one, is what got you interested in a career in performance nutrition?
I could probably talk for 30 minutes about that subject alone, to be honest. I think when I think back on like growing up and playing basketball in Ireland, there was a gap around nutrition, and I was always kind of interested in it, but I was young enough that nobody really talked about it. And then when I went to the States, that's when I really realized how much of an impact it could have had on me as a player, with regards to like when I was 18 and I was going against other girls that were the same age as me, but had been doing strength conditioning, had been having a really, really good diet for years beforehand. So like my ability was probably on par with them. However, the strength and the knowledge wasn't. So with that being said, I kind of decided to study it more. And then my whole life has kind of revolved around sports, nutrition, how it can all interlink, I guess. And I wanted to come back to Ireland and primarily work with young people with regards to their nutrition and kind of help them the way that I would have liked to have been taught, I guess. Yeah. Okay. Condensed version.
That's brilliant. And Lauren, yourself, how did you get involved in it?
Yeah, I suppose I was one of those weirdos that obviously played basketball for years when I was younger, and kind of when I was 16 and we're all trying to decide what what are we going to take for our leaving cert and whatnot. I kind of almost was able to talk with the kind of guidance counselor that we had at secondary school, and I almost knew the pathway that I wanted to take into sports nutrition from about 16. So I absolutely loved everything about food and cooking, and kind of was brought up by my parents to always get involved in the kitchen and kind of think about what you're eating, but enjoy kind of food as well. So I did my undergraduate degree in human nutrition and dietetics, knowing that was kind of a really good baseline knowledge and foundation, and always almost that bit of a backup that I can always work in hospitals and with those who are kind of clinically ill. But then straight away after my undergraduate degree, I came over to England for the first time and did my master's in sport and exercise nutrition. So that was a few years ago now, with the idea of, look, if I can pursue this, that's great. If not, I always have a backup option. But I was just really fortunate to get a job with the English Institute of Sport pretty early on, and kind of my career has developed from there. It's that area, which is that lovely combination, as Hannah said, around, food and getting the best out of food, but also that sport side of it, and working with people who really want to improve their food, their nutrition, what they're eating and doing day to day. That's my journey.
Yeah, and it's great to hear having a long-term plan. I suppose the one thing nobody was planning for this year was COVID hitting, and I suppose maybe you would talk about the nutrition now for athletes in lockdown is obviously going to have changed a bit. So, you know, what practices should we be following?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really good question. Nobody anticipated it at all. And I know it's been a really tough year for everyone all around the world. I think a lot of the advice that people are giving out at the minute when we're all working from home or kind of home a lot of the time is to give yourself a good bit of structure and routine. And what better way to structure your day than through your kind of meals, through breakfast, lunch and dinner. And that's some of the really simple, easy ways that we can give ourselves that routine during the day and make sure we're going through kind of everything that happens in our life. So for me, like structuring your week, structuring your day to day around your meals, what meals you're going to have, when you're going to do the shopping, when you're going to do the cooking, and having a good meal plan throughout the week, I think is a really good baseline strategy for everyone, whether you're an athlete or not. And kind of thinking in advance, you know, we've got loads of extra time at the minute. I think it's a perfect opportunity to get into your cooking, to try new recipes, to try new foods, and potentially, yeah, just try some new strategies that you might not have tried before.
Yeah, and Hannah, just as Lauren said there, we do have a lot more time now being in lockdown, and it might be that more people have the time to focus on their nutrition. So what kind of tips would you give them?
Yeah, I mean, Lauren covered a lot of really, really good ones there. But I think one thing to pick up on is the trying new recipes and stuff, because I know as an athlete, when like it comes to game day, I'll probably eat the same thing every day. But athletes now, they have the time to trial loads of different recipes and like go out on your run or like go and do a gym session, well, right now outside or like wherever you have access to, you know. So try the recipes that you may have been putting off for a long time. And then especially for athletes, don't change too much just because it's lockdown. Like try keep your protein levels adequate enough that when you're going back, hopefully the start of December now for basketball players, like your muscle loss won't have happened. Like try and keep your protein up, try keep your hydration levels up, especially now. We're hoping to start playing at the start of December, so we have about 2 weeks. So let's try and hone in on like good nutrition now, so that when it comes to it, you're not flogged the first training session being like, oh, I really wish I would have done a bit better the last few weeks. Like really try and not perfect it, but eat that little bit better now, because hopefully we have a goal to play for.
Yeah, exactly. And I suppose the next question, touching on something you said earlier about when you went to the States and being maybe a bit behind as an Irish athlete in terms of nutrition and things like that. That's something I think in Irish basketball it is a big thing. We're always trying to improve our jump shot or our dribbling and things like that. So one that I'll put out to the both of you is to discuss is, you know, how important is nutrition to basketball players?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's like the sixth man, like it's the sixth man off the bench, it's your sixth man on the court. Like I think it's really, really important. Now I went to the States many years ago, so the girls and guys going now probably have a lot better knowledge than I did. But I do think that it's incredibly important. Like the research is there that it shows better, like if you're fueled correctly, you'll have better intermittent sprints, so going up and down the basketball court, which is what a basketball player wants. Your jump shot, like not your jump shot technically, but you will potentially jump better and higher, and your cognitive brain function. I mean, not just to perform, like our bodies to perform, we need to be able to think on the basketball court. So if our nutrition is good, that will help our brain, and you want to make good decisions on the basketball court. So that's an area that I think many people overlook, is that, oh, I need to be fueled to keep my body going. But you also need to be fueled to make the right decisions. So I think it's right.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like for me in the kind of Olympic and Paralympic spheres, we talk about kind of 4-year cycles. And I think we kind of calculated that during an Olympic cycle, an athlete will eat around 8,000 times. And for me, that's 8,000 opportunities that you could positively influence your physiology, whether that's to recover more effectively from a training session, whether that's to fuel more effectively, whether that's to fuel better during a game so you can get more out of that game and influence, whether that's, you know, physiologically or physically, as Hannah mentioned there, or whether that's your brain function and your decision making. And there's loads of different elements. And I suppose for me, how I normally talk to athletes around that performance impact, nutrition can impact one of three key areas for me. It's one, you can get better training adaptations day to day. That second area is all around your game day performance. The better you can fuel, maybe we can enhance your performance on the day. And that third area is reducing your risk of kind of illness and injuries. So if our nutrition isn't on point, potentially we might get ill a bit more often, which means you'll spend less time training, which means potentially you'll spend less time adapting, improving your training outcomes, and potentially improving that jump shot as well. So they're kind of the three kind of core principles that we know nutrition can have an impact on. So it's definitely a really important one that, unfortunately, I think, a lot of people kind of see that value in, but probably don't spend as much time or investment in kind of putting good practices in place.
Yeah, brilliant. So I suppose then maybe looking at some athletes who start looking at nutrition, and I know I was guilty of it when I was younger. As soon as the thought of trying to get in shape, you went straight to the protein shakes and things like this due to kind of lack of knowledge. So I suppose maybe talking around supplements, what are the best supplements to take? When should you be taking them? And you know, how do you know which ones are safe to take? I'll leave that up.
Yeah. I do think that a supplement conversation probably needs to be had one-to-one with the athlete. Like, I think for us just to come on here and go, oh, take this, that is not the way that we probably practice. And for any athlete that is listening to this, and hopefully there's loads of you, if you're looking to take a supplement, and a lot of young people are, and they're wondering, okay, do I take protein powder? Like, there's so many different names, there's so many different companies. Like, go to a nutritionist, find somebody that you trust, that has a good qualification, that can advise you correctly. A lot of underage athletes will take stuff that they may or may not be taking just because they either see on social media, they read about it or something like that. Whereas it can be really, really important that you take the right stuff. There's unfortunately articles, and there's more and more stuff coming up that people are taking banned substances. That's something that we don't want to happen. So I guess for maybe the athletes that are taking stuff at the minute, make sure it's informed sport tested, you've been given it by a professional, that kind of thing. You could say afterwards a protein shake would probably be okay, but again, like, are you getting enough protein in real foods? That kind of thing. Like, everything needs to be weighed up. That's in my opinion. I don't know, Lauren, what you think about that.
No, yeah. I love that pun. Everything needs to be weighed up. Sorry, didn't mean that. I suppose for me, like, supplements at a whole are exactly what they say at the tin. They're to supplement your diet. And if we almost look at those core principles of performance nutrition, the first, if we think of it almost like a pyramid of priority, that first element, those low-hanging fruits, are your basics in terms of day-to-day. What are you doing in terms of your meals? Exactly what Hannah says. Are you getting enough protein throughout the day in terms of your meals and your snacks and everything? And I think it's really important from an industry, the majority of kind of those top level nutritionists, we all advise that food first approach. And I think that's really important place to start. What does your diet look like on a day-to-day basis? The next level that we then focus on is around that performance nutrition. What are you doing before, during, and after your training sessions? Are you getting the right combinations of foods in particular to get the most out of your training and to support your immune system? The next level there is kind of that what we call ergogenic aids, or things that might potentially have a bigger impact from a sports supplement perspective. I think in terms of some of your sports foods in particular, so if we think about your kind of shakes or your protein bars or things like that, a lot of the time those foods and those nutrients that we're looking into, we can get from food. So if we're talking about kind of your protein shakes, your wheys, your caseins, I mean, how do we make whey and casein? They're from milk. And there's a lot of research out there, not just around your wheys and your casein in terms of that recovery, but as milk as a whole, as a complete food that can impact positively from a recovery perspective. So I think the first step always is to look at that diet, and if there's an element of, you know, we can't always get milk straight out of a training session from a fridge, so maybe there is an alternative that might be a bit more convenient from a powdered perspective. Now, Hannah touched on a really, really important point. It's so important to make sure that anything we do potentially take is batch tested and batch certified. And I suppose any of the athletes that I work with, I'll only ever advise an athlete to potentially look into using a supplement that's Informed Sport approved. And this is essentially a completely independent certification program that companies can go through to batch test their products. Now, it's not all products, and I think that's a really important distinction. They'll normally only, companies will only select certain products to test, and it's really expensive for them. So usually these products will be a bit more expensive because they've got to go through the certification program. And I suppose you're reducing your risk. You can never eliminate the whole risk, even with Informed Sport, but you're massively reducing your risk. And it shows that you've kind of gone through your due diligence of choosing the best and the least risked product. I think that's really important. But again, majority of the times, in terms of your sports foods, you can get what you need from that nutrition perspective from your food. So that's the first step I think those young athletes really need to hone in on and have a think about.
Fantastic. Moving on probably to the next one, and Lauren, you might start with this, and it's a question I've been eager to ask a nutritionist for a while. Is a lot of people, you know, watch the Game Changers documentary on Netflix, and you know, there's talk of some elite level athletes changing to veganism and to increase their performance. So, just what's your opinion on veganism and vegetarianism as a diet, or as a way of staying nutrition for athletes and to increase their performance?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and I've had this conversation so many times with athletes. When that documentary first came out, goodness me, it was all over social media, and every athlete that I worked with at the time came up to me, and some really good conversations around, is there something here, or are we missing something? And at the other side being, you know, really questioning of, oh, that didn't sound right. Is there, you know, like he said that, but that doesn't make sense to me. And I think, yeah, it's a really good question. I mean, for me, the first thing is always, what's the performance impact? Is there evidence there to really show? And I'm not talking about just one athlete changing their diet and then having a performance impact. Is there big studies to be able to prove that an element of your performance will be positively impacted by changing your entire diet? And unfortunately, the research actually isn't there. And I think that just shows how complex diets are. It's not just that you're removing animal products, you're changing your entire diet and all the complexities of that. And to be able to say that changing so many elements of what you're eating day to day has numerous impacts on your performance is actually really, really difficult. I think, you know, I work with vegan and vegetarian athletes, and they're certainly able to perform, absolutely, but it probably wouldn't be something that I would advise an athlete to do. One, from what I've already mentioned, in terms of there isn't the research there to prove that change will positively impact performance, but also it's a challenging diet. And in terms of what we eat day to day, there's some big changes that need to happen, and there is an increased risk of micronutrient deficiencies. And I think it's something that any athlete that is considering doing really has to do their research and look into what elements of their diet do they have to change and adapt, and maybe increase certain foods and things that they're eating and drinking to be able to compensate for some of those micronutrients that they might be missing. So yeah, it's one that I wouldn't specifically advise, but there are certainly athletes out there that that do follow diet and are perfectly able to compete at that level.
I'll pass that over to same question over to you, Hannah.
I mean, I think Lauren really put it in a nutshell, like very, very well said. The only thing, like that documentary, I think everybody found it really, really interesting. As you said, loads of conversations appeared from it, everything like that. My only worry from that, and I spoke to like a few concerned parents probably after that documentary, was because their young sports children, boys and girls, were trying out vegetarian diets, like veganism, everything, because of this documentary. Like the kids weren't going and researching the way that many like probably professional athletes were, had the help to. So what we then had to do was kind of show, which I think is really, really important, as Lauren, you said, is like, if you go to this diet and you haven't been on it for a particular length of time or your whole life, like your body is going to be missing certain things. So where do you have to get these elements from? So where are you going to get your protein sources from? All of this stuff. It is a hard diet to maintain. And especially, I don't think it's suitable for people that do it off the cuff. You can't, like, your performance will decline if you don't do the research, if you don't like, you might have to supplement with certain things. You need to do it well for it to potentially be good for you. But again, it may not suit you. Just because this documentary showcased famous sports people that, like, or you said a couple of famous sports people that are on the diet, yeah, that's great and it works for them. They probably have a team of 12 people that it also like, it helps put other like vegetarian meals together, do you know? So I think it does take a lot of research if you're interested in doing it. Again, the main thing is the research is lacking in this area, as you said. Like that, I think, should be what started with that documentary, but of course it didn't, because it wasn't what they wanted to show. But yeah, I do think it works for some people, it doesn't work for others. If you're interested in it, definitely do a huge amount of research before you start it, because if you start it, well, say for example, if an athlete started to become a vegetarian now, and season is going to start hopefully in a month's time, you're going to be missing out on a load of stuff. It won't work necessarily like that. It needs to be built in. Again, like there are vegetarians that are great athletes and all that stuff, but I probably wouldn't recommend it off the cuff for anybody.
And I think just kind of leading on from that, you know, like there are certain elements from that documentary and from vegetarianism, veganism, that certainly we can improve on. So I had one athlete that after they had seen the documentary came up to me being like, so should I be really eating loads more fruit and vegetables? I'm like, absolutely. Like this is something to work with here. Yeah. And you know, if that's another kind of plug that you can use to get athletes to have more fruit and vegetables, to eat more whole grains, to focus on your pulses and your beans and your peas, your lentils, which are really good nutrient dense foods, well, then that's absolutely brilliant. And I think the other part of the documentary, which I'm absolutely no expert on, is kind of the environmental impact, which we can't deny that. And I think the British Dietetic Association over here, they've done this really good campaign called One Blue Dot. And it's all about how can we eat more sustainably and how can we make better choices around our diets to reduce our impact on the environment. And I think probably more of the conversations that I've had more recently has gone down that route as opposed to the performance impact. And I think the first thing there is actually thinking about some of our really basic practices, not just looking down, right, let's get rid of all these foods, but thinking more about where we're buying our foods. Can we buy more locally? And can we buy foods that are just from Ireland or from England, where I'm based? Are we wasting a lot of food? Do you know, I think the stat I was reading the other day was we waste about 10 million tons of food in the UK alone every day, and the impact that that's having in the environment is massive. All those kind of elements are really, really important, and will probably have more of an impact on our dietary or on how our diet impacts the environment and that sustainability. You know, so there's other elements that we can do that are definitely coming from the conversations from that documentary that I think we can impact, that will probably have more of an impact than suddenly completely overhauling your diet.
I'm going to say another thing on that. Sorry.
Go ahead.
I think a really good thing also is that it made people aware that protein doesn't have to be coming from meats or fish. Like lentils, chickpeas are really inexpensive ways to get really good protein in. So I think that would be good for maybe students that are in college. They can't afford really, really lavish meals. They think that they have to spend a load of money on. It can be quite inexpensive. And I think that's one thing, like vegetables and fruit aren't the most expensive things in cans. Like frozen food, like frozen veg is the same. So I think that was another thing that came from it was, okay, we don't have to spend loads of money on like a Wagyu steak. No, you don't. You can. I know I went from one extreme to the other.
Chickpeas versus Wagyu steak.
So it's the same.
No, that's brilliant. I was delighted to get that question. And I suppose rightly so, being a nutrition talk, we've talked a lot about food today, but obviously hydration comes in with nutrition as well. And I suppose maybe starting with you, Hannah, if you want to talk around as you get your hydration in there. Just talking about hydration strategies for athletes and the importance of hydration.
Yeah, that was one thing that I think I spoke about a lot with people when lockdown happened, was because, as Lauren, you mentioned earlier, like your routine, we got out of our routine. So that might have been throughout the day, you're drinking a certain amount of water. If you're in the office, you're going and filling up your water, that kind of thing. And that went out the window. Loads of people were getting headaches and not feeling great. Simply put, they forgot to drink their water, which happens. Hydration for performance is very, very important. There are loads and loads of different strategies. Probably the most easiest one to talk about is if it's game day, or if you have training that day and you talk the color of your urine when you wake up in the morning. It's so inexpensive to see, do you know, like it doesn't cost anything to see how much water you should be drinking throughout the day. It's a very, very basic test. If your urine is dark yellow or dark brown, you know you're very, very dehydrated, and you want to try and get that to like a light yellow color. I don't mind talking about urine. I could probably talk about me all day long, but it's a really, really inexpensive way just to understand your body. So you might need to take a diurelyte on, that kind of thing. But that would be super simple to see throughout the day how much water you need to take on. Another really good strategy would be, and I'm sure a lot of athletes do this, especially in the professional setting, would be to weigh yourself before and after. And then you can see, like, especially if it's just a normal training session, if you weigh yourself before, weigh yourself after, try not to drink during that training session, depending on how hard it is. And then you can see the sweat loss during that session. And this is really, really important for people that, especially for young athletes that might have a few games back to back or over a weekend. We might hydrate before the game and be like, oh, we've drank loads, but it would be the recovery and the hydration after the game or after the practice that I feel like people neglect. And that will affect us the next day. Say, for example, you've got training or a game, that's where like it's going to affect the whole body function, it'll affect your protein synthesis, everything. So that's really, really important, that if you can figure out your sweat loss and calculate your sweat rate, to know what to replenish afterwards would be great. But I do think that hydration is it's overlooked. You're like, girls will come to training not being fully hydrated, they'll be like, oh, we'll be grand. Your performance will be lacking if you're not hydrated. That's probably the bottom line.
Yeah. And just kind of on from that, I mean, we kind of talk about in performance nutrition on this 2% mark. So if you're dehydrated by 2%, which is if you look at your body weight, if you drop by 2%, well, that will have a negative impact on your performance. And I suppose how you would have a negative impact. I mean, if you even just think about cognitively in your brain, about 70% of your brain is made up of water. So if suddenly you're just decreasing the amount of water that's in there by 2%, which is tiny, that can affect your decision making on the court. So whether you should make that pass, whether you shouldn't, it'll affect your endurance capacity as well. So those the last part of your fourth quarter, are you really able to sprint that full length of the court and as best as you possibly can? Maybe not if you're dehydrated by the end of the training session. So there's loads of different elements where if we are not on top of our hydration, that it can have a negative impact. Now this can be really difficult, if we're indoors, if it's during the summer, or if it's a really hot environment, or potentially if you're just a really heavy sweater or a really salty sweater, it can be really, really difficult to stay on top of that. So Hannah touched on those really good points of let's always make sure that you go into a training session or a game well hydrated, because if you even start the game underfueled, underhydrated, you've not put your best foot forward to perform as best as you can. So that first element is so important. Exactly what Hannah said, start the day off well. I always advise, no matter what, with your breakfast, have a pint glass of water. That's the best step to start off with the day. And always trying to get some fluid in and a decent glass of water with all your main meals. At the very least, and then drinking and kind of supplementing that throughout the day as well. I think a lot of people kind of forget that your hydration levels can fluctuate quite a lot throughout the day. And some people might get a bit worried that their weight's kind of changed and gone up or gone down by a few kilos. And the majority of that time, if we're weighing ourselves first thing in the morning, any of those big fluctuations are usually due to your hydration. So that's normally a good indicator as well. If you do weigh yourself kind of once or twice a week in the morning times, if there is those big fluctuations, it's probably your hydration levels. And I think I completely agree with what Hannah said, that recovery and that rehydration element is really, really important. So yeah, I mean, there's so many elements you could go down. I mean, just to kind of touch on kind of urine color, that's really important. And I'd even say every time you go to the bathroom, have a look at the color of your urine and see how it's changing throughout the day. Obviously take account of any kind of vitamin or mineral supplements you might be taking. They'll obviously darken the color of your urine. So just take account of that, because that might not be a true reflection of your hydration levels. And then some certain foods, like you'll probably know if anyone eats beetroot out there, or some things like asparagus, they can actually darken or change the color of your urine as well. So just to be aware and be conscious of that too, which can have an impact. And then really important then after your training session and after your a game that you might have, just thinking about even how often you go to the bathroom, because sometimes you're like, oh, well, I haven't actually been to the bathroom very much over the last kind of few hours since I finished training. And that's probably a big indicator of your body's trying to catch up with all the sweating that you've gone on during that training session, and it's trying to compensate. So that's another indicator to make sure you're drinking loads more. And again, looking back to that milk that we mentioned earlier, not only does it have good quality carbohydrates to refuel your body, good quality proteins to kind of help repair your muscle, but it's got a source of electrolytes as well, and it's a liquid. So it's an all-rounder, one might say, to help recovery.
Being paid by milk to promote it.
No, but my parents brought me up when I was a kid that at every mealtime, we never got offered a glass of milk. We never got offered a glass of water. We were only basically drank a glass of milk. So I absolutely love it. And at every chance I'll have it. But also, you know yourself, Anna, there's a ton of research out there to say it's nearly a complete food. The only nutrient that it's missing is iron, really. So it's something that definitely everyone should be drinking regularly throughout the day and around the training session.
That's brilliant. I could talk all day on this subject. To be honest, I'm learning so much. But I'll finish with one last question for both of you. So maybe if we could just talk about the nutrition for different times during the day and different training schedules. You know, before and after games or during off days. And Lauren, if you want to maybe start on that.
Yeah, absolutely. So some of the really basic principles around how and when to fuel around training sessions or games. You kind of start off beforehand with that last main meal. And we'd normally advise to have that last main meal to get your fuel stores up anywhere between 2 and 4 hours before your training session or your game. Now, the reason there's normally that range is because everyone's a bit different. Everyone has different preferences in terms of how full you feel or how quick your body takes to digest, or maybe just the logistics throughout the day. Maybe you physically can't eat because you're working until 2 hours before a training session. So I think having that range is really important, and making sure that's quite a balanced meal full of your kind of fueling based carbohydrate foods, your kind of recovery and support based foods like your proteins, and then also having a source of your fruits and vegetables there to support your immune system. So making sure that's nice and balanced, and the more the higher intensity, or the more intense the training session or the games, probably the more carbohydrates you need to be eating. So you might be looking at about half your plate there, depending on what the training or game day looks like. And then I suppose looking a little bit closer to the start of training session or a game, you might be looking to have a small carbohydrate based snack. So something that's low in fiber, that's low in fat, and that's a decent source of those fueling type carbohydrates, to make sure that you're all set to go for that training session. So again, something like your bananas or your cereal bars, or maybe a sports drink if you don't like to have too much solid food close to your warm up. Some of those ideas are quite a good one. And then during, I'll throw over to you, Hannah.
Yeah, I think Hannah.
Well, that was perfectly said. I do think that a lot of athletes deter away from carbohydrates, and they need to know that they are their best friend for performance, as Lauren said. But if you're exercising for over 60 minutes, you need to probably be drinking more than just water. So if you want to drink a bit of a sports drink, about, I think it's like 30 to 60 grams or whatever, glucose, that's what you want to be ingesting. But at halftime, basketball game, if you go into the locker rooms, again, you could have something that you like a glucose source. A lot of people like jellies, or you can have your drinks, Jaffa cakes, if you like Jaffa cakes, or bananas, anything that you like. Again, as Lauren did say, everybody is different. So everybody on the basketball court is playing a different position. You're all different skill levels. Nobody's nutrition is probably going to be the same. So what you like, somebody else may not like. So make sure that you're eating for you and what digests well. Especially, you want to make sure of that during the halftime, is that you're not running out to the bathroom in the middle of the game. Trial it. This lockdown could be really good at time to trial different things and then go out and run and see how you feel. But it's really, really important, if you are exercising for over 60 minutes, you're trying to top up that glucose source as much as possible to have you keep going for the second half. Do you want to go to the recovery now? Do we go back? Recovery. So as Lauren said, carbohydrates for a game, probably half your plate. After the game, get that protein source in. If you're waiting around and you have a fridge, milk would be great. Or if you won't get home for a long time and you have been taking protein shakes, something like that is convenient, and you can have it in your shaker and add water or something afterwards. Or if you go home straight away, a meal with a good source of protein in it would be really, really good. But make sure that also you're adding in your carbohydrates. You've lost a lot of glucose, you've lost a lot of your stores throughout that game, so you want to replenish. And also after the game, that's when your body starts to recover again. So we're going to start recovering for the next 24 to 48 hours. So I know, like, you might go out, or that meal after the game would be quite important. So try not and have it as like a takeaway meal or something like that. If you can get something small in first, like a really good protein source, and then maybe have a meal, or like if you're traveling through, like stopping off in a garage or something, try and get the first source of protein really, really good, so that you start that recovery process. The next day after game or after a hard training session is also really, really important. If you're not training, you might not need all of the carbohydrates that you did the day before, but your body still needs to have good nutrients to recover so that you're able to go again. Like basketball, we probably train 3 times a week, game once a week at least. So like you're always on the go. So you need to be on top of your nutrition. So a recovery day shouldn't just be, I'm going to eat bad food. If you do, or not bad food, don't like that, but like takeaways, that kind of thing, like try and have still a couple of good sources of food so that your recovery is still going ahead. Lauren, do you want to pipe in?
Yeah. I mean,
Tell you, they're going to think we practice these smooth transitions.
Yeah, I know. I'm just being conscious. I don't know, because you can talk over people not here. Yeah, in terms of that recovery element, for me, like the first question is always, what are you doing within the next 24 hours? So if you're going to train again, whether that's another training session on the court, whether that's a gym session or going for a run or anything like that, if you are within the next 24 hours, that recovery period, those few hours after that, after your training session, it becomes really important, because you have a limited amount of time to recover. If you have 24 to 48 hours before your next training session, that recovery period afterwards, it's less important. It's still important to get some good quality food in, but you might not be in a rush, because we talk a lot of times about kind of the half an hour after your training session is that really key time where you need to have something, and that will vary depending on how long your recovery is. So that's kind of a really important one. And for me, if at all possible, I'll always advise, if you're going to your next main meal and your appetite isn't reduced enough that you're able to have that kind of solid food, excellent, go for it. And you can definitely go to solid food. An alternative, if you're on the run, will be something along the lines of, even if you had like a chicken sandwich, if you go white bread, which is really easy and quick to digest, you've got some chicken, you put some salad in there, you've got a nice balanced snack that you can kind of bring anywhere. You don't need a fridge or anything like that for your milk. And then in terms of adapting based on your recovery day, I think Hannah touched on a really good point there. Your recovery day is the opportunity for you to kind of regenerate, to help your body repair, to get your body in as best a place as possible for the next training day as well. So it's really important that we don't neglect our nutrition on those days, and having a think about how you structure your day, how you might vary your fueling or carbohydrate based meal. It's still really important that we still get those carbohydrates in throughout the day. In terms of recovery days, I think it's just that portion size we can probably reduce. So as I mentioned before, when we're looking for our balanced meals, I normally work off a rule of thirds. So if on an average day, a third of your plate looks or has your fueling based carbohydrate foods, a third of your plate has your recovery based protein foods, and a third of your plate has your support based fruits and vegetables, you can then vary the carbohydrates depending on how much training you're doing. So on a big training day, you might increase that to half a plate. On a recovery day, you might keep it at a third for your breakfast and your lunch. But then in the evening times, if you're going to bed, in the evening times, you don't need a lot of fuel, you could reduce that down. You could maybe cut those kind of carbohydrates out of that meal. On the flip side, if you're going to train again the next day, first thing in the morning, then it's actually really important to keep the carbohydrates in the evening time. And maybe you could reduce your intake of those fueling based foods for breakfast or in the morning time, having something like an omelette or some eggs, and getting a load of vegetables in there would be a really good idea. But again, a really prime opportunity to make sure you're hitting all your fruit and vegetable intake, as we talked about earlier, on that recovery day, to make sure you're supporting your immune system as well.
Well, that's fantastic, and I just want to thank both of you for the talk today. I've learned a lot, and I'm sure everyone else watching will have learned a lot. So, just thanks for everyone for tuning in as well to the session, and just so you know, there's a range of other discussions as part of the Basketball Ireland Performance Conference. So just check out our social media. So thanks again to both of you. That was fantastic.
Thank you.
Cheers, thanks guys.